map, one of humanity's oldest symbols of understanding the world, finding direction, and situating oneself. At first glance, it may appear as nothing more than lines, but in reality, it reflects a civilization's accumulated knowledge, worldview, and imagination. Maps reveal not only lands and seas, but also struggles for power, trade routes, belief systems, and cultural boundaries. In this chapter, we will witness the millennia-long journey of maps. Step by step, we will examine humanity's struggle to fit the world onto paper, a grand story intertwined with science, art, and politics. The lost human. Why was a map necessary? One of the oldest questions in human history is, where am I? Even the first humans emerging from caves had to create some form of map to describe their surroundings, remember safe zones, and relocate food, perhaps on a stone, perhaps in their minds. The need for maps was not limited to navigation. It was a natural extension of humanity's effort to understand and exert control over the environment. Communities practicing agriculture had to know seasonal water flows, fertile lands, and boundaries. Nomadic tribes marked paths to remember routes and avoid dangerous areas. Thus, a map was more than a depiction of space. It was a vital memory. Maps were, first and foremost, tools for survival. Hence, the history of maps should be read not only as the history of geography or exploration, but also as the history of human intellect and imagination. Knowing where a place is implies the right to possess, reach, or protect it. Drawing a map thus became not only practical, but also a political act. The first maps symbolized how those in power viewed the world. Every line on a map tells a story. The story, begun with lines, tracing the first maps. The origin of what we call a map lies not merely in lines on paper, but in how humans understood the world. The earliest maps, contrary to our modern notion, were engraved on cave walls, stones, bones, or even the earth itself. They may not have had the details we expect today, but as efforts to conceptualize space, they had already claimed their place in history. One of the oldest known maps is the Çatalhöyük settlement plan, dating back to the 6th millennium BCE. This depiction, showing a settlement from above and linked to a volcanic mountain, is considered an early map. Such drawings documented not only inhabited areas, but also beliefs and perceptions of danger. In ancient Mesopotamia, maps engraved on clay tablets assumed the world was a flat disk, placing cities around a central river. While these maps were inaccurate, they represented early attempts to access and systematize knowledge. In other words, the world was not yet fully known, but became meaningful through depiction. In ancient Egypt, surveys along the Nile produced map-like schematics for irrigation. In China, geographic maps on silk dating back to the 4th century BCE were found. These maps documented not only land knowledge, but also imperial boundaries. The early stage of mapping was shaped by intent, not accuracy, scale, or direction. The mapmaker represented their own surroundings, culture, and beliefs. Thus, the first maps reflected not the world itself, but how humanity perceived it. From sky to earth, locating through astronomy. To understand the earth, humans first looked to the sky. For centuries, humanity used stars as guides to determine location, navigate, and systematize geographic knowledge. One of the quietest revolutions in map history was learning to read the heavens. For ancient sailors, the North Star was more than a light. It functioned as a compass. The Polaris navigation technique still used today traces back to this knowledge. Egyptians determined agricultural seasons by stars. Babylonians recorded celestial cycles, creating sky maps that would later underpin mapping the earth. Ancient Greek philosophers combined astronomy with cartography. Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy using only shadow lengths, a scientific triumph and a milestone in precise mapping. During the Middle Ages, Islamic geographers advanced star observations. Astronomers developed latitude-longitude systems using sophisticated astrolabes and measuring tools, providing a mathematical foundation for maps. To depict the Earth accurately, one first had to understand the sky. With astronomy, maps became scientific documents, as well as cultural ones. Humans who could read the heavens could not only find direction, but also define themselves. Compass and explorers, turning direction into science. Perhaps the most radical transformation in map history began with the compass. Navigation no longer depended solely on the sky or intuition. It became measurable, repeatable, and reliable through magnetic guidance. This was more than a tool. It was the key to maps approaching scientific reality. The earliest compass traces appear in 9th century China. Chinese sailors began navigating using lodestones. This technology spread to the Mediterranean via Arab sailors and eventually reached Europe. By the 13th century, European compasses became critical tools of the Age of Discovery. Explorers needed accurate directions to cross oceans, discover the unknown, and find new trade routes. Maps now indicated not only coastlines, but also wind directions, currents, and harbor points. Cartography thus became a cornerstone of maritime science, not merely geographic knowledge. Figures like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Magellan could not have succeeded without maps and compasses. Every voyage contributed new knowledge. Every new port expanded the world's perception. The compass symbolized the transformation of direction from intuition to science. Maps became instruments for creating new worlds, not just representing the old. The shadow of empires. The political power of maps. Mapping is not merely transferring geographic knowledge. It is a display of power. A map silently but effectively declares, "I know this place. I rule here." From the Middle Ages onward, maps were not only in sailors' hands but also on kings' and emperors' desks. Maps delivered to administrative centers depicted lands to conquer, regions to tax, and where borders began and ended. A map thus became a political weapon. For example, the Roman tabula Peutingeriana showed the empire's entire road network. It served not only for navigation, but as a visual representation of reach and control. Every line marked authority. Later, European powers during the colonial era used maps as instruments of conquest. Lines drawn on maps could start wars lasting years. During Africa's partition, European rulers used rulers to delineate borders at tables, turning maps from geographic tools into documents shaping history. Maps became strategic documents for war, peace, negotiations, treaties, and governance. In short, a map was not just a tool for knowing the world. It determined who defined it. The miracle of the printing press. Maps become widespread. For centuries, maps were in the hands of a few: kings, explorers, sailors, scholars. They were difficult to draw and reproduce. But in the 15th century, the invention of the printing press changed everything. Knowledge reached beyond the elite, into the hands of the public. Gutenberg's press did not only reproduce books, it enabled the mass production of maps. Hand-drawn maps, often containing personal interpretations, could now be standardized and printed in hundreds or thousands of copies. This development facilitated commerce and spread geographic awareness. A sailor no longer relied solely on a captain's knowledge, but also on printed maps. A student could debate the Earth's shape with a map in front of them. Maps became educational, not merely directional tools. European atlases transformed map-making into a science. Cartographers like Gerardus Mercator founded map science. Maps improved as they were printed and corrected as they spread. They appeared in encyclopedias, travel books, and even on walls. Humanity no longer just heard about the world, they saw it. Illusion and reality. The deceptive world of projections. Fitting a sphere onto a flat sheet of paper. This seemingly simple task is one of cartography's most complex challenges. The Earth is round, but maps are usually flat. Projection systems address this issue, but they bring debates that shape perception. Projection transfers the globe onto a plane, inevitably causing distortions. Areas enlarge or shrink, shapes stretch, distances mislead. Sometimes these distortions are technical, sometimes they are deliberate choices. The most famous example, the Mercator projection. It preserves direction, ideal for navigation, but distorts continents' sizes. Greenland appears nearly as large as Africa, though Africa is 14 times bigger. Europe and North America seem larger relative to the southern hemisphere. A political perception emerges more than a geographic error. Alternative projections, Peters, Robinson, Winkle-Triple, attempt to correct distortions but emphasize different features: shape, area, aesthetics, or scientific accuracy. Maps are never neutral. How and by whom they are drawn, and for what purpose, matters. Even today's digital maps inherit this projection debate. Observing a map shows not just the world, but the perspective of those shaping its view. The digital revolution. Maps on screens. Maps that were once only on paper are now in our hands. Millions check routes via smartphones every morning. This is perhaps the most significant turning point, the digitization of maps. Digital maps transform not only how we view, but also how we create and use maps. Satellite imagery, real-time traffic, layered data. A map now shows not only where, but also what, when, and how it relates. Platforms like Google Maps, OpenStreetMap, and Yandex Maps form a new information ecosystem. Users themselves become map makers. Restaurants, walking routes, buildings. Maps become dynamic, living documents. Digital maps shape not just spaces, but behaviors. They suggest routes, influencing decisions, paths, even lifestyles. Yet they also raise questions: data privacy, neutrality of algorithms. Digital maps democratize access but bring new ethical dilemmas. Understanding, not just seeing. The philosophy and future of maps. What do we see when we look at a map? Coasts, mountains, roads, countries. Yes, these are the visible aspects. But a map is more than geographic boundaries. It visually expresses how humans understand the world. A map depends as much on where you look from as on what you see. For a traveler, it represents exploration. For a politician, sovereignty. For a student, knowledge. For a refugee, hope for survival. Each map carries the worldview of its era. Medieval maps centered God. Modern maps prioritize scale and direction. Today's maps speak data, guided by algorithms. Future maps may never be printed at all. Virtual reality, augmented reality, brain-machine interfaces, all redefining spatial perception. What if the world began to be mapped without us? AI, automated systems, data flows. Maps may update independently, but our interpretation will continue to define who we are. Ultimately, a map is a journey to understand, make sense of, and navigate the world. And in this journey, the key is not only knowing where we go, but remembering where we came from. This journey through maps shows a line carries not only a boundary, but also a perspective, understanding, and the spirit of an era. From cave drawings to digital screens, this is humanity's own voyage. A map is not merely the world's representation. It is how humans situate themselves. Survival, discovery, dominance. Maps served all these purposes, yet always as a visual manifestation of the human desire to comprehend the world. Digital maps may show paths, distances, even lifestyles. But the most important thing is to remember who we are.